side. And I'm really excited for the conversation we're going to have today. But the core focus today is on financial advisory practices and the sort of education around that for diverse audiences and how that changes the math. And so maybe while we're sort of getting everybody set down here, I'm going to call on people one at a time, ask you all to introduce yourselves and talk a little bit about what your client base looks like, what your focus is. And I'm just going to go on the order that's here on my screen. Dasarte, are you with us, my friend?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you great. Tell us a little bit about your practice, what you guys have been building, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, I'm the founder of Berknell Financial Group. My practice serves millennials in tech. It's been an interesting run for us because we find that a lot of underrepresented professionals find themselves in the technology space. And with that comes education, a need for education, right? A need to know how to work with an advisor and how to really help them design their wealth. I find that a lot of my clients are carrying baggage, generational baggage, right? That has to do more with counseling versus just purely investment management. So we try to be not all things to our clients, but we try to help them in a variety of ways that allows them to open up the gateway and, the wealth that true financial planning can bring. So again, Dave, thanks for having me on the show. And
I think we're going to be talking a lot about baggage today. I think it's going to be a common theme. Lindsey, why don't you go ahead and unmute yourself and introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Lindsey Swanson. I'm a CFP. I run a family financial firm out of Northern California, Stripper Financial Planning, and I work specifically with sex workers. So that's a large group of people, but the reason really that I work with that group, my dog's right. The reason that I work with that group is really that I wanted to work with a stigmatized group and make sure that I was serving people that weren't being served by, other advisors out there.
Yep, makes sense. Colton?
Hi, my name is Colton. Colton Etherton. I'm the CFP, founder of Out of the Office Planning. And I work with tattoo artists. So, very, very straightforward.
We'll get back to that in a minute. And then Ramona?
Hey, Dave. My name is Ramona Mayer. I just started with Family Wealth Management Group as a certified financial planner practitioner and expanding the Rainbow Network. I'm supporting the LGBT community, immigrants, and veterans, and I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to encourage folks to make this as much a conversation as possible. If folks have questions for this group, the easiest thing to do is probably send me a DM at Dave Nottig on Twitter. I kept my DMs open. I'll keep that up on the corner. But one thing that I think I want to start with here is, I've talked to a lot of advisors for the last 30 or 40 years, and hunting for your niche is a really common way for advisors to think about building a practice. Dentists in the Midwest or guys who have 3 handicaps in San Francisco. I mean, that's been a very traditional way of trying to find your affinity group. All y'all seem to be taking a very different approach here, which is you're going after communities that may not be right down the middle for all of those other affinity marketing groups. And I'd love to talk a little bit, just start to use the word baggage. What's different about going into these kinds of groups? Do you have to start at a different place? Do you have to change your business model? Dasarte, why don't you get us going, and then please, folks, just jump in.
Yeah, I started my firm when I was 24 years old, and the thing that I found after working at RA, at a brokerage, and then at a bank in New York, was that financial planning was reserved for people that were wealthy enough to have an advisor, right? So I don't come from that demographic. Nobody that I know comes from that demographic. But when you start to get out of that high net worth, ultra high net worth demographic, you find people that want to do well with their dollars, but just don't know how, right? Their parents might have made mistakes. They might have made mistakes, and they're trying to undo that while building a better future for themselves. So that's a lot of baggage. That's a lot to unwrap when working with a person, right? And that takes a patient advisor. That takes a lot of education and just time of doing the habits day to day that gets them from point A to point B. So I find that a lot with young, underrepresented professionals working in tech, and I'm sure that a bunch of the advisors find that as well.
Yeah, Lindsey, I'd love to turn to you a little bit on that, right? I mean, you're working with, a community that has largely been marginalized, if not ostracized, by sort of mainstream economics, if you will. Do you have a different starting point? I mean, you're dealing with folks that are, in many cases, maybe less banked to start with, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, I think, so initially when I started my firm, which was mid-pandemic, August of 2020, I had been told for the previous few years at quite a few of the firms that I worked at that just when people came through the door that didn't fit us, basically we just didn't have a place for them. And a lot of them came from marginalized groups. To Dasarte's point, maybe not having as much money or being earlier or just like having problems that a lot of advisors don't know how to handle. And so initially when I started my own firm, I really just was like, I want to work with stigmatized folks, but I'm going to let kind of the market decide who that is. Like, who comes through my door? Who can I say yes to? And what happened is I just started saying yes to more and more sex workers, and just realized kind of the gaps in the industry and how, to use your word, how ostracized they are. And I think especially now, a lot of us, there's firms who specifically work with people who are, LGBTQ or the like. When we're seeing across, I'm absolutely going to get political. When we see across the country that we're starting to lose rights, having advisors that are on your side is even more important, to know that you're not just working with someone who's saying they're neutral on a subject, but who is actively fighting for your civil rights and speaking out about it. And so sex workers are facing a lot of what we see other demographics facing, of just, not being taken seriously, not being treated fairly, not being able to use, payment processors and banks, and having professionals turn them down. So I think the more that I got into it, the more I was like, shit, this is a huge problem, and I'm going to try to become an expert on it.
It sounds like it's almost like beyond financial planning in a sense. And Colton, I'd love your thoughts here too. Like, you've targeted a specific group of, I would have to imagine, fundamentally small business owners, right? I mean, I think most tattoo artists that I've ever met are either independent contractors or have their own shop. They're certainly not working for a mega corporation, right? So they're starting from a very different place. They're not worried about necessarily whether or not they're managing their incentive stock options, right? You must be in there a bit of a life coach and consultant for some of these folks now.
Yeah, no, that's a very good way to put it. Basically, all of them are small business owners, independent contractors, whether they rent a spot at a shop or own their own place. I've come across about 2 shops so far that actually have their artists set up as W-2 and have benefits, but that's extremely rare. So yeah, a lot of them get into it because they like the art and doing that, and not the business and the money side, and trying to figure that out. And there's a lot that comes with it too, because a lot of them do come from backgrounds that aren't typical, in the sense of like clients I used to work with, right, in my old firm. And so kind of coaching them through that, and starting even at basic stuff of separating business accounts and understanding if a business entity, makes sense, or, talking through all that. Like, it's a lot of a different conversation than I was having previously. And even just showing them why it makes sense to do certain things, right, when it comes to, like, let's say tracking income and that kind of stuff, because there is also this, almost like this ingrained culture from prior years, of a pirate culture, as some people call it, because tattoo artists were kind of on the fringe of society at points. But as things grow and tattoos are becoming more mainstream, they're making a lot of money. A lot of these artists charging $150 an hour or more. And, it's like, okay, well, what do we do with this money? And then they eventually get to that point where it's like, well, I'd like to buy a house or something. And so it's talking through that and explaining why we have to do things a certain way.
I'm going to make a bit of an assumption here that you're all working probably with younger client bases than the average advisor in the country. And I'm curious whether that means you literally have to think about how you charge differently. I mean, Ramona, have you thought about that? Do you have different ways of approaching different kinds of audiences? I know, Dasarte, you and I have talked about that before too. Like, you have to change how you charge because you're working with a different audience. Ramona, what are your thoughts on the business model side?
Yeah, absolutely. I come to realize that I need to be a little bit flexible and not just have one way of getting paid. So I do have clients all age-based all over the country. But the market that I want to work in now, I feel like in the accumulation phase. They're slowly building. They're small business owners. They're, just fresh out of college, you name it. So I have to find ways where we can work together, whether it's on a subscription basis or a one-time annual fee for just management. We have not just assets under management, we're working towards a specific goal where we're having planning conversations frequently. So I think I've had to be a little agile in my practice, not only with the conversations that I'm having, but also on how I'm getting paid and how we're working together.
Does that ring true for other folks?
Yeah,
Definitely.
it remains true. Dave, I just had a thought because this is great stuff when it comes to sex workers, tattoo artists, young people. The title of the spaces is Financial Planning for Diverse Groups. But I think traditionally these are neglected groups. Nobody wants to work with younger folks. I've never heard of an advisor working with tattoo artists. I've never heard of an advisor working with sex workers, right? And for me, I think that this is where an advisor can find deep value in their niche. Like when you're that advisor that is specifically talking to a demographic, trying to get to know that demographic, their pain points that traditionally nobody's thinking about a tattoo artist's pain points, right? So that's your opportunity to provide deep value, become the subject matter expert in that group, and grow a sound practice. So I commend and admire all the advisors, that are speaking today, because I think that's what this industry was made to do, provide deep value for people who need it, the services that we can offer.
Yeah,
I think you...
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think you find, too, just to Dasare's point, that I think especially probably in Colton and my practices, that we find that there's certain types of people who we didn't necessarily, think about that go more towards, because both of ours is occupation-based, there are definitely types of people that are more interested in sex work than other types of people. For instance, most sex workers are essentially small business owners. I have a lot of people with disabilities that I work with. I have a lot of people who are neurodivergent, and a lot of that is because this is a job that made sense for them. And I think I have a few tattoos, so I kind of have an insight into what tattoo artists are like. But I think the type of person that, becomes a tattoo artist is very creative and special, and you don't always get those type of clients when you work for a larger firm that just works with retired folks. And so I think it is helpful that we're doing this, but I just see a greater insight into what different groups of people are like. For me, it's really interesting. I just think that especially the neurodivergent people that I work with are just so incredible in how they've molded their life to fit them in a way that really allows them to shine. And it's really beautiful.
Does it change how you think about the investment component of it? I mean, I think a lot of the world thinks that all financial advisors do is put people in portfolios. I know better. I know too many financial advisors in my life. But in that narrow case of okay, now we're dealing with somebody who's got $100,000 in their IRA or whatever, and they actually have some investment decisions to make. Does it change how you think about the investment decision process?
I mean, definitely. For me, I'm advice only, and so I don't manage the investments, but obviously I still speak to them and help my clients with it. But I find, just inherently a lot of my clients are, to what Colton was saying, more edgy, on the fringes of society, kind of crunchy, if you will. So I think a lot of the traditional, okay, we're going to put you in this normal portfolio, they're like, whoa, I don't want to be contributing to all of these different parts of society that I'm not on board with.
So ESG investing is part of the equation.
Yeah, but not just ESG investing, really, not just following the list and being and then also on that list is ExxonMobil and, Nestle and all the shitty companies that still are on this list. But, really following through and being what does this mean? And I think that goes back to clients, especially younger clients, or just a lot of the people that I work with, really wanting their advisors to actually agree with their worldview and follow through with it and understand, what problems they would have with those investments without them just saying, without them being the first one who's ever thought of it,
Hey, Lindsey, I 100% agree with you. And I think that for people that are serving quote-unquote diverse groups, one of the first things that you learn when you get your license is KYC, right? Know your customer, know your client. And it's almost non-negotiable for you to know exactly who you're serving. how much you can charge, what their pain points are, and their outlook or perspective on society, because that's going to help you be a better financial planner for those groups. So, spot on, and I think that's something that I try to work on, often, because, things are changing, the world is changing around us, and that's inevitably going to affect underrepresented groups first.
Any advice to advisors who are maybe trying to sort of find their own niche or trying to figure out a way to sort of break out from the sort of traditional paths a lot of younger financial advisors end up on in terms of like really owning your niche? Because one thing that I think is a legitimate concern that I have heard from some advisors is it has to be authentic, right? I mean, if you're targeting whatever it is, Latinos in Western Massachusetts, and you can't genuinely speak to that audience's immediate needs, it's going to come across as worse than inauthentic. It's going to come across as a grift. So, like, how do you do that? Do you have any advice in terms of how you communicate, or how you structure the practice, or how you get new clients that sort of guarantees that you're walking the walk that your clients are expecting?
Yeah, my advice, and then I'll hand it over, is two ways, right? So Lindsey mentioned that she kind of let the market decide for her. And, my mom would say, lean into what leans into you, right? I was always like a good athlete, and I just loved playing ball, so I leaned into it a little bit. And it took me kind of far, right? So you can go that way and see what type of clients that you attract. That's like a natural, could be a slower process, if you will. But the other side of the coin is to figure out what you're interested in, right? I'm interested in tech, or I'm interested in the way, the government system of Michigan works and how their plans are. Whatever you're interested in, you can begin to speak to that demographic, create resources for those people, and help them. So those have been the two ways that I've found to be successful. And advisors that kind of lean into, what leans into them, and work with people that they love within that demographic do very well. And then if it's just a natural interest, like if you're interested in tech, again, cryptocurrency, whatever the case is, you lean into that. And you speak to that demographic, and build a client base around that.
Yeah,
Colton.
Just couldn't agree with that more. Just the fact that leaning into something you're really interested in. I mean, I'm not a tattoo artist, but I wasn't necessarily an artist before, but I enjoyed it. Right, something I always enjoyed, wanted to learn more about is tattooing and the process. And I mean, for me, it just kind of fell in my lap, if you will. The niche. Like, it wasn't anything I'd planned on before. I just happened to meet with a tattoo artist shortly after launching my firm, and thought, hey, that'd be cool. And then kind of dove into it from there. There's some talk before, and as far as, I don't want to say marginalized in a way, but like my old firm, right, didn't let me show my tattoos even during the summer, right? Like, I couldn't roll up my sleeves because it was hot. So kind of that gave me a push in a way. I was like, well, okay, well, it'd be fun to work with these people. But yeah, just genuine interest, you know what I mean? Like, I'm talking to my clients not just about their money and their life, but also asking every once in a while for a tip on drawing, because I've talked to them, and that's something that, I see some of my sketches on Twitter, but that's something that interests me, mainly because I thought it was something I couldn't do, you know what I mean? Like, I always loved tattoos, but I could never do anything. But in talking to clients, like, yeah, anyone can do it, and everyone kind of gives me tips. And
I mean, that's an interesting parallel, right? Because I think most people think they can't money,
Yeah, exactly.
So
we kind of trade tips, you know what I mean? And it's great, but, I think just diving into something you're super interested in, right? Like, I read about tattoo styles in my free time. Like, it comes off, I think it comes off genuine, instead of like before when I would try to go network and build a client base, when I was going to Chamber of Commerce meetings. Like, that didn't come off natural. That did not work well for me in the slightest.
Right.
So I think, just something you actually genuinely enjoy. You don't necessarily have to be like that person, right? Like, I didn't have to be a tattoo artist first to transition, but I had to have an interest in what they're doing to be able to learn more about them and their problems.
Ramona, you're serving obviously a slightly broader demographic. It's not like narrowed to a specific industry or a specific job title, but still it's an affinity group. How do you think about that environment? Is it still largely a matter of you find the people you resonate with and they refer you to other people you resonate with?
Yeah, it's all great points. I think that there's a lot of ways that you could bring in new leads, but when I think about myself, who I am, I'm a Romanian immigrant, veteran, bisexual woman, single mother. I could break down the different components that I am and try to represent all of those different dynamics, but I think that that would be too broad for me to do that. I'm able to talk on those topics as someone who's experienced them, but for me, what it really boils down to is passion and the bigger picture. You know, yes, I want to have a practice and I want to be able to make money and be a financial planner and help change people's lives, but bigger than that. And that's kind of where I feel like I'm being called to, is really being intentional with my time, really being following, you know, what's calling out to me. And right now, human rights, women's rights, LGBTQ rights are where I'm being drawn to, and I'm wanting to help the underdog. And so in general, I like to volunteer and then organize with nonprofits. And so I've met a lot of people there. And through that, I've met attorneys and CPAs and professionals as well in like the FPA or the Chamber of Commerce. And those are great too. But I think really those people that are following the passions that are important to me are going to give me, are giving me the more solid referrals, where it's not just let me get them in the product. They have some money that they want to invest. It's not just a one and done. It's more of a relationship with me for those intimate referrals. And so that's what I think is where I'm wanting to spend my energy on, is those communities that are important to me, really allow for the broader relationship scope.
We're running, we only have 8 minutes left, which is insane. We could go on for hours, but I wanted to pivot a little bit here. You obviously have very diverse groups of folks that you're talking to. That's part of why this is an interesting conversation. What are you telling those clients now? We've got a lot going on. Regardless of the headlines of the last week, right? We're in the midst of a crypto downturn. We're obviously in a major economic shift. I think there's, even regardless of politics, there's just a lot of uncertainty, I think, in people's financial lives, period. What's different about what you're telling your clients now than the average advisor might be? What are you doing that is sort of unique in that conversation during what is a very, I would call it, risky and uncertain time for a lot of these folks? And maybe, Lindsey, I'll spin it back to you.
Yeah, my clients in particular, and this isn't specific to my clients, but it's definitely happening in this group a lot, is censorship. So I'm really pushing my clients to make sure that they have the opportunity to diversify later by protecting their content. So if they have content in the cloud, making sure it's downloaded. If they have contacts that they're using private companies to store, that they download that information and have a hard copy, because so much of our information and our data and the content and value that we create is online, and when your rights are being taken away, you lose access to that. And so as much as I can, just stabilizing the relationships you have, reaching out to people, having resources, but really protecting your information and making sure you have copies of everything.
Yeah, that sounds a little bit like what used to get referred to as the housekeeping process for onboarding a client. Making sure you've got your 7 years of tax returns in the file. This is sort of a modern and slightly more unfortunate version of that, I guess.
Yeah.
Dasarte, what about you? Again, you're dealing with a pretty broad group of folks. What do you think you're telling your clients that's a little different than the sort of average guy?
Great question, by the way. I was thinking about my answer as you were asking it. I don't think I'm telling them anything different. I think it's how I'm telling them that's different, right? This is a time that, if you're in California like me, gas is $1 million per gallon. Everything at the grocery store is more expensive, right? The world seems to be in complete disarray. And I think it's important for advisors to flood their clients with information that they can understand so they can be more comfortable in this time period. So I'm really trying to speak to my clients in a way that my mother could understand, an immigrant from Liberia, a world third country, right? Or my niece could understand. And giving them just the power of understanding. Because I think that a lot of it is just the way that we communicate things in the industry. That's not being picked up by certain demographics, right? And certain people. It wasn't made for them. So I'm trying to give them all the knowledge the resources that they need so that they can feel a little bit of comfort and remind them that this is something that happens, right? So I think it's more of the how, not what I'm doing that's different.
So let's talk a little bit more about the how then. So, a lot of folks have different approaches, right? Everyone from, Barry Ritholtz writing a giant blog on Bloomberg everybody reads, down to folks that are just making phone calls on Tuesday afternoons, going through their client list, checking in on folks. So what has been working over the last month, right, when you're working with folks? Do you feel like you have a different communication path or a different pattern than somebody else might? Maybe Colton, start with you.
Sorry, I got distracted by my kids here.
I'll let me spin that over to Ramona then. So, when you're talking to your clients, what are you finding is the most effective way to chat with them, in this environment? I'm guessing it's not just the emails I get.
Yeah, it's a lot of different touch points, and it's specific touch points for each group or type of client. And I think even more now than ever is a reason why clients need a financial advisor, is so that way we can help talk to them and help understand what's going on in ways that they can understand, like Dasarte mentioned. Let's keep things simple, and let's address what's really going on here is the emotion, the fear behind it all. And so I've had to just become creative based on each client's preference on how to communicate, but it's consistent touch points. Right now it's a lot of hand-holding, but it just kind of reinforces why they need us.
Colton, what seems to be working for you?
Yeah, a lot of my communication, talk to my clients, same thing, email, phone calls, also Instagram is huge for my client base. It's kind of where they all live. So putting stuff out there, doing, answering questions there. So kind of like an Ask Me Anything thing to kind of do that and sharing the answers with everybody. So it's not just clients in that regard, but also people that follow me, and just really letting them know, especially because a lot of my clients they don't have the assets. So I'm like, this is actually a great time in that regard for you guys when we're building an asset base and we're investing, but also talking through the keeping cash on hand for them, right, for their potential cancellations and that kind of thing, which could happen when, things like inflation and gas prices increase. And so it's like, all right, look, here's how we kind of need to navigate this with you guys. Yes, people are still going to pay for your art more often than not, but, let's make sure that,
one sort of interesting question I have here, my older kids are deeply Zoomers, trying to build careers themselves, and the gig economy just lives on top of a lot of folks like that, particularly creative folks. Just things like scheduling. Do you find that you don't get to do your job 9 to 5 because your clients don't get to choose their time either?
Yeah, it's most of them are pretty good with their scheduling. Honestly, a lot of them are booked out 2, 3, 4 months ahead of time, and they're pretty good at keeping certain days off. And so, honestly, it tends to be Monday and Tuesdays. For some reason, a lot of artists have that off. But I do some odd hours because sometimes they're not working until noon, and then they go until 8 or 9 at night, right? Or so sometimes I have to pull some weekend hours or later evening calls. So yeah, it's definitely having to be more flexible in that regard. But they're all usually pretty good at managing their own calendars because they're booked out so far in advance, so they kind of have it set for months, which personally I think that sounds kind of terrible.
Well, we have about a minute left here, and I want to make sure we have sort of one lightning round question where everybody gets to toss something in here. I talk to a lot of younger advisors who are sort of up and coming in the business, and they look to the kinds of businesses you all are putting together as sort of touch points on ways to think about building a practice. If there is one piece of advice you could give some young mid-20s person out there who's trying to get into this business, fascinated by money, and really wants to lean into a passion for them, whether that ends up being a profession or an affinity group of some time, is there one thing that you wish you'd known when you got started? And Ramona, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think that trying to go at it alone was not as successful than going at it together with someone else, like Laura Latourette helping me kind of really allow me to expand my platform. So I think there's an African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. I just really think having a community and having a place where you can meet with people that help build a fire and motivate you, I think that's really necessary. So that way you guys can bounce ideas off of each other and have a space where you can talk about your fears and also grow together.
Love it. Dasarte?
I was trying to think of what I was going to say.
Sprung it up.
I can go if you want to take a minute to start. I would say, just because I have this ready to go, any job that's like, you just gotta keep your head down, you gotta put in your time, any job that like tries to keep you in your place, no. Just, it's not worth it. Go do something else. Go work for someone that like wants to see the full you and not like the boxed in version.
Love it. Colton?
Yeah, I'd say, don't listen to people that tell you can't build a practice focusing on a certain group that you want to help. Whether it is tattoo artists or sex workers or people that love Call of Duty, I don't know, something weird. I don't know why that came to mind. I don't even play Call of Duty, but you can do it. Like I had a lot of people when I was going through this idea of transitioning my business, because I didn't start this way, but transitioning it to tattoo artists. It was about a 9-month time frame of thinking on the idea. A lot of people said I shouldn't do it. It's crazy. Not a big enough market. To be honest, it was scarier to do that than starting the business in the first place. But, I think it's possible. We don't need 8,000 clients, right, to have a good practice. You can get by with 30, 50, 100, depending on what you're trying to grow. And chances are, if there's some unique thing that you're interested in or like, you can find those
Find 50 people to go help.
To help, yeah, for sure.
All right, Dasarte, you get the last word.
All right, so I think you should be married to your why and not the what, right? Because I think a lot of advisors are like, hey, if I'm an advisor, I'll have independence. I won't have to. Some people think they want to work a 9 to 5. I'll be able to make a lot of money and stuff like that. But really, I think the thing that separates great advisors from average ones is because of their why. Like, I love to help people. I'm interested in this demographic. I see myself impacting people that are going to come after me in this industry. And if you commit to that why, I think you end up being a great advisor and you can learn everything else along the way.
Well, what a great way to take us out, Dasarte. Thanks very much. Look, I want to thank all three of you, Lindsey, Colton, Dasarte, Ramona. It's been a great conversation. I've learned a lot. I find you all very inspiring.